The Galactic Academy of Interspecies Studies stood on a moon that orbited a gas giant in the Andromeda system, and its halls welcomed students from 47 known civilizations across the galaxy, making it the most diverse educational institution in known space. Professor Vrexthol was a towering insectoid creature with compound eyes that could see in 12 different light spectrums, and he had taught xenobiology at the Academy for over 300 cycles, earning a reputation as one of the most demanding instructors in the institution's long history. His classroom was a massive amphitheater that could seat over 200 students of various sizes and biological configurations, with special atmospheric zones for species that breathed different gases and temperature-controlled sections for those who required extreme heat or cold on this particular morning. The professor stood at the center of the amphitheater and clicked his mandibles together to call for silence, watching as his students settled into their designated seating areas. "Today marks the beginning of your practical examination," he announced. His voice translated into 47 different languages through the universal communication system embedded in every seat. "And I expect each of you to demonstrate your understanding of predatory evolution by bringing a predator species native to your homeworld." The students murmured among themselves with excitement and nervousness, for this examination was famous throughout the Academy as one of the most challenging and spectacular events of the academic cycle. "You will present your predator to the class," Professor Vrexthol continued, "and you will explain how this creature shaped the evolutionary pressures on your world and influenced the development of your civilization." Elena Vasquez sat in the human section of the amphitheater, which consisted of a single seat, since she was the only human currently enrolled at the Academy, and she listened to the professor's instructions with a small smile. Playing on her lips, the other students were already discussing which terrifying creatures they would bring, and Elena could hear fragments of their conversations through her translator. "I will bring the Shadow Stalker from the caves of Helix Prime," boasted Zinarari, a tall reptilian student with scales that shifted colors based on his emotional state. "For it is the most feared predator in my entire system. That is nothing compared to the void eel of my homeworld," replied Melox, a gelatinous being who communicated through bioluminescent pulses, which can sense the bioelectric signatures of prey from over 10 kilometers away. Massive armored student named Groth rumbled something about bringing a thornback. A creature that Elena gathered was essentially a living tank covered in poisonous spikes. Elena said nothing and simply made notes on her datapad, already knowing exactly what she would bring for the examination. The days passed quickly, and soon the morning of the presentations arrived, filling the amphitheater with an electric tension that made the environmental controls work overtime to keep all the different species comfortable. Professor Vrexthol had arranged for special containment fields to be installed around the presentation area, powerful energy barriers that could theoretically hold any known predator in the Galaxy. Sankari was the first to present, and he walked to the center of the amphitheater with obvious pride, carrying a containment unit that hummed with barely restrained energy. "Behold the Shadow Stalker," he announced as he activated the unit, and a creature emerged that made several students gasp in fear. The Shadow Stalker was a six-legged nightmare with glossy black skin that seemed to absorb light itself, and its mouth was filled with fangs that dripped a paralytic venom capable of bringing down creatures 10 times its size. It moved with terrible grace inside its containment field, testing the barriers with calculating intelligence that suggested it was not merely an animal but something far more dangerous. "The Shadow Stalker hunted my ancestors for millions of years," Zinarari explained, "and it forced us to develop our color-changing camouflage as a survival mechanism." The class applauded politely, though many kept their eyes fixed on the creature. With obvious nervousness, Melox went next, presenting the void eel, a serpentine creature that swam through the air as if it were water. its eyeless head constantly turning as it sensed the bioelectric fields of everyone in the room. On my world, there is no hiding from the void eel, Melox pulsed, for it can find you in complete darkness through solid rock. And even in the void of space, the presentations continued throughout the morning, each student revealing predators more terrifying than the last Groth unveiled his thornback, a creature that looked like a boulder covered in spikes until it suddenly moved with shocking speed, its armored hide making it nearly invulnerable to attack a floating student named Whisper presented something called a Mind Hunter, which apparently killed its prey by invading their thoughts and driving them to madness. Another student brought a Plasma Drake, a creature that could superheat its own blood and spit. It is a weapon capable of melting through starship armor. By the time it was Elena's turn, the amphitheater had seen dozens of the most dangerous predators in the known galaxy, and the containment field area looked like a nightmare zoo of evolutionary perfection. Elena walked to the center of the amphitheater, carrying a simple transport crate with no containment field, no warning labels, and no biohazard seals of any kind. The other students watched with confusion as she set down the crate and opened its door. And a small orange creature with 4 legs padded out and sat on the presentation table, blinking lazily at the room full of aliens. It was covered in soft fur the color of a sunset, and it had whiskers that twitched as it observed its surroundings with apparent disinterest. "What is that supposed to be?" someone called out, and nervous laughter rippled through the amphitheater. Professor Vrexthal stepped forward, his compound eyes studying the small creature with obvious confusion. "Student Vasquez," he said carefully. "Perhaps there was an error in translation, for we asked for a predator, a species evolved to hunt and kill." Alina reached down and scratched behind the creature's ears, producing a strange rumbling sound from deep in its chest. "This is Mango," she said with a warm smile. "And he is a cat." The laughter in the amphitheater grew louder, and several students shook their heads or made gestures of dismissal. Surely, they thought, the human had not understood the assignment. Or perhaps her species simply did not have any real predators on their gentle homeworld. But Elena just kept smiling as Mango yawned widely, revealing rows of small but wickedly sharp teeth. And she knew that by the end of her presentation, no one in this room would ever laugh at a cat again. The laughter echoed through the amphitheater as Elena stood calmly beside her cat, and she could see the other students exchanging looks of amusement and pity at what they believed was her embarrassing mistake. Zinare leaned toward Melox and whispered loud enough for his translator to pick up. "The humans must not have any real predators on their world. For their planet must be some kind of peaceful paradise if this is the best they can offer." Melox pulsed with bioluminescent agreement, and several other students nodded or made similar gestures of dismissal. Professor Vrexthal tried his best to be diplomatic, for he had always prided himself on treating all species with equal respect regardless of their perceived capabilities. "Student Vasquez," he said gently, "perhaps you would like to return tomorrow with a different specimen, for I am sure there must be something more suitable on your homeworld." Elena shook her head slowly and continued to pet Mango, who had curled up on the presentation table and appeared to be falling asleep. "With respect, Professor," she replied, "I believe Mango is exactly the right choice for this examination." More laughter filled the room, and someone called out asking if the creature was perhaps dangerous, because it might make someone sneeze. Elena waited for the noise to die down, and then she activated her holoscreen with a calm confidence that made some of the students pause their mockery. "The creature you are looking at," she began, "is called Felis catus, commonly known as the domestic cat, and it has lived alongside humans for approximately 10,000 years. Data began to populate the holographic display floating above her head, and the numbers that appeared made the laughter slowly fade into confused silence. On Earth, The domestic cat and its wild relatives have directly contributed to the extinction of 63 species. Elena continued, including 33 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Mango stretched on the table and rolled onto his back, presenting his fluffy belly to the room in a display of complete relaxation. The hunting success rate of a domestic cat is approximately 70%, Elena said, which means that 7 out of every 10 hunting attempts result in a kill. She pulled up comparison data that made several students lean forward in their seats with growing unease. "Your shadow stalker," she said, nodding toward Zinarari, has a hunting success rate of approximately 62%, which is impressive by any standard. Zinarari's scales flickered with surprise, for he had always believed the shadow stalker to be the most efficient hunter in the known galaxy. The great sharks of Earth, which are among our most feared ocean predators, have a success rate of around 50%, Elena continued. And wolves, which hunt in coordinated packs using sophisticated group tactics, manage only about 14%. She let those numbers sink in as the amphitheater grew quieter and quieter. "Mango here," she said, gesturing to the sleeping cat, "comes from a lineage of hunters so efficient that they nearly drove entire ecosystems to collapse on multiple continents." Professor Vrexthel stepped closer to the presentation table, his compound eyes studying the small orange creature with new interest. "These numbers are verified?" he asked, his mandibles clicking with what Elena had learned to recognize as academic curiosity. "They come from centuries of scientific study," Elena confirmed, "and I would be happy to share the research databases with anyone who wishes to review them." She zoomed in on an anatomical diagram of a cat, highlighting its various predatory adaptations. "The domestic cat possesses retractable claws," she explained, "which means the claws stay sharp because they are protected when not in use, unlike the claws of many other predators that become dull from constant contact with the ground." Groth rumbled something about his thornback also having sharp claws, but Elena was already moving to the next point. "Cats have night vision that is 6 times more powerful than human vision," she said, allowing them to hunt effectively in almost complete darkness. The hologram showed a cat's eye structure, demonstrating how it gathered and amplified available light. "They can hear frequencies ranging from 55 Hz to 79,000 Hz, Elena continued, "which means they can detect sounds that most species in this room cannot even perceive." She showed a diagram of a cat's ear, explaining how it could rotate independently to pinpoint the exact location of prey. "Their whiskers are so sensitive that they can detect changes in air currents," she added, allowing them to navigate in total darkness and sense the movement of prey even when they cannot see it. Mango chose that moment to wake up and begin grooming himself, licking his paw and rubbing it over his face with casual indifference to the growing tension in the room. But surely, Melox pulsed with obvious uncertainty. Such a small creature cannot pose a real threat to larger species. Elena smiled and pulled up another set of data. "Cats are obligate carnivores," she explained, "which means they must eat meat to survive. And their bodies are designed from the cellular level to be perfect hunting machines." She showed images of cat teeth, highlighting the long canines and the specialized carnassial teeth that worked like scissors to shear through flesh and bone. "They can jump up to 6 times their own body length from a standing position," she said, "and they can twist their bodies in midair to always land on their feet." The hologram demonstrated a cat's riding reflex, showing how quickly it can orient itself during a fall. "Their spines are incredibly flexible," Elena continued, "giving them the ability to squeeze through any opening large enough for their skull and to contort their bodies in ways that allow them to catch prey from almost any angle." She paused and looked around the amphitheater at the faces of her classmates. Seeing confusion and the beginnings of genuine respect, on my world," she said quietly. "We learned long ago that size is not what makes something dangerous." Mango finished grooming himself and stood up on the presentation table, stretching in that particular way cats have that makes them look twice as long as they actually are his eyes, which had seemed so sleepy and disinterested before, suddenly locked onto something across the room, and for just a moment, every student in the amphitheater could see the predator lurking behind that cute and fluffy exterior. The domestic cat, Elena concluded, is one of the most successful predators ever to evolve on planet Earth. And it achieved this not through size or strength, but through patience, precision, and an instinct for killing that has been refined over millions of years of evolution. She reached down and picked up Mango, cradling him in her arms, where he immediately began to purr. "And the most remarkable thing about this predator," she said with a smile that made several students deeply uncomfortable, "is that humans invite them into our homes and let them sleep on our beds." The amphitheater was completely silent now, and Professor Vrexthal stared at the small orange creature with an expression that Elena could only describe as profound scientific unease. Professor Vrexthal stood in silence for a long moment after Elena finished her presentation, his compound eyes fixed on the small orange creature that was purring contentedly in her arms. The other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and the earlier laughter had been replaced by an uncertain tension that hung in the air like static electricity before a storm. "Your data is compelling," the professor finally said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "But data alone does not demonstrate practical capability in the field." Elena nodded, having expected this response from the rigorous academic. "I understand, Professor," she replied, "and I would be happy to participate in a practical demonstration if the Academy has facilities for such a test." Professor Vrexthal gestured toward a large doorway at the far end of the amphitheater. "The Academy maintains a simulation chamber capable of replicating various hunting environments," he explained, "and it would be appropriate to test all of today's predators under controlled conditions." The students murmured with excitement at this unexpected addition to the examination, and those who had brought particularly impressive predators seemed eager to prove their creature's superiority. Elena followed the class through winding corridors until they reached a massive chamber that reminded her of the holodeck she had seen in old Earth science fiction programs. The simulation chamber was enormous, easily the size of several football fields combined, and its walls were lined with projectors and environmental controls, capable of creating any ecosystem imaginable. "We will simulate a standard hunting environment," Professor Vrexthal announced, "consisting of a nocturnal forest filled with small prey analogs that will test each predator's ability to locate and capture targets." The students gathered in an observation gallery that overlooked the simulation floor, and one by one, their predators were released into the virtual environment. The chamber's walls flickered and transformed, creating a dense forest of alien trees under a moonless sky, with small creatures scurrying through the underbrush. Injiri's Shadowstalker was the first to be tested, and it burst forward with terrifying speed the moment it was released, its 6 legs carrying it through the darkness like a living nightmare. The observation screens tracked its movements as it hunted, showing its kills tallying up with impressive efficiency. Next came the Void Eel, which slithered through the simulated forest with eerie grace, using its bioelectric senses to locate prey that was completely invisible to normal. Sightgroth's Thornback crashed through the underbrush with less finesse but equal effectiveness, simply overwhelming its prey with armored aggression. Each predator took its turn in the simulation, and by the time it was Mango's turn, a clear hierarchy had emerged based on kill counts and hunting efficiency. And now, Professor Vrexthal announced, "The human specimen will be tested." Elena carried Mango to the release point and set him down gently on the simulated forest floor, giving him a scratch behind the ears before stepping back the cat sat perfectly still. Minutes passed as the other students watched with growing impatience, and some began to whisper that the creature had clearly frozen in fear or confusion. Perhaps it does not understand that it is supposed to hunt, Zinaro suggested with poorly concealed satisfaction. Elena said nothing and simply pointed at the observation screen, where Mango remained motionless, his eyes wide and fixed on something in the darkness. More minutes passed, and the whispering grew louder, with several students openly mocking the apparently useless predator. Then, without any warning whatsoever, Mango moved. It happened so fast that the tracking sensors struggled to follow, and the students gasped as the small orange blur shot through the underbrush with explosive speed. One moment he was sitting still, and the next he had crossed 20 meters and pounced on a prey analog that the sensors had not even registered yet. How did it know that target was there? Malox pulsed with confusion. Checking the sensor data, Lena smiled and explained that cats often detected prey through sound and vibration long before any movement was visible. Mango did not pause after his first kill, moving through the forest with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. In the low light conditions, he would freeze, sometimes for seconds and sometimes for minutes, and then explode into motion with devastating precision. The kill counter on the observation screen began to climb, and the whispers of mockery gradually transformed into whispers of disbelief. That is not possible. Groth rumbled as Mango's count surpassed the Thornbacks. The sensors must be malfunctioning, Zinarari insisted as the cat exceeded the Shadow Stalker's total, but the sensors were working perfectly, and Mango continued to hunt with tireless efficiency, his orange fur barely visible in the darkness as he stalked from target to target. An hour passed, and when the simulation finally ended, Mango's kill count was triple that of any other predator tested. The observation gallery had fallen completely silent, and even Professor Vrexthel seemed at a loss for words. But what happened next disturbed the students far more than the impressive statistics. Mango began carrying his kills back to the release point, depositing them in a neat pile at the spot where Elena had left him. "What is it doing?" someone asked with obvious unease. Elena stepped forward and crouched down as Mango approached with another small prey analog in his mouth. "He's bringing them to me," she explained, accepting the simulated creature and setting it aside. "Because cats often share their kills with those they consider family." Mango purred loudly and then turned back toward the forest, disappearing into the darkness to hunt again. "But the test is over," Professor Vrexthel said with confusion, "and the prey analogs have been deactivated." Elena shook her head slowly. "Mango does not know that," she replied. "And even if he did, it would not matter, because he is not hunting out of hunger." The students watched as the cat stalked through the now empty forest, moving from shadow to shadow with the same deadly intensity he had shown before. "Then why does it continue?" Malox pulsed nervously. Elena was quiet for a moment before answering. "Cats hunt for practice," she said, "and they hunt for entertainment. And sometimes they hunt simply because they enjoy the act of killing." The words hung in the air like a chill wind on earth. Elena continued, "Cats will often play with their prey before killing it, and they will hunt even when they are not hungry, killing far more than they could ever eat." She walked to the edge of the simulation floor and called out softly, and Mango immediately abandoned his stalking to trot over to her. Rubbing against her legs with apparent affection, she picked him up and he began to purr again, kneading her arm with his paws, his claws extending and retracting in a display of contentment. "This is what makes the domestic cat truly remarkable," Elena said, turning to face the class with the purring predator in her arms. "Because this creature that hunts for pleasure, this killer that brings death as easily as breathing, has chosen to live with humans as a companion and friend." Professor Vrexthel stepped forward, his compound eyes studying the cat with what Elena could only describe as scientific horror. "Your species," he said slowly, his translator struggling to convey the depth of his disbelief. "You live with these creatures in your homes?" Elena smiled and scratched behind Mango's ears. "We have lived with them for 10,000 years, she replied. "And they domesticated themselves by choosing to stay near human settlements." The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "They chose you?" He repeated. "Yes," Elena confirmed. "And honestly, we are still not entirely sure why. Though we certainly are not complaining." Mango yawned widely, showing his sharp teeth, and then settled into Elena's arms for a nap, completely unconcerned by the room full of terrified aliens staring at him. The demonstration had ended hours ago, but the students of the Galactic Academy could not stop talking about what they had witnessed, and Elena found herself surrounded by classmates wherever she went. Gone was the mockery and dismissal that had greeted her at the start of the day, replaced by a mixture of fascinated curiosity and barely concealed fear. She sat in the Academy's common room with Mango curled up in her lap, answering questions from the crowd of aliens that had gathered around her seating area. Ejanori pushed his way to the front of the group, his scales shifting through nervous colors as he studied the sleeping cat. "I must ask you something," he said, his translator conveying obvious hesitation. "And I hope you will not take offense at my question." Elena nodded for him to continue. "This cat," Zinarari said carefully, "it is not the apex predator of your world, is it?" Several students leaned in closer, eager to hear her response. Elena laughed softly, and something about the sound made several of the nearby aliens take an involuntary step backward. "No," she admitted, stroking Mango's fur as he purred in his sleep. "Mango is not even close to being our apex predator." A heavy silence fell over the common room as the implications of her words sank in. Moax pulsed with bioluminescent distress, the colors in their gelatinous body flickering rapidly. "Then what?" they asked with obvious dread. "Is the apex predator of Earth?" Elena considered the question for a moment, before pulling out her datapad and projecting a new holographic display for the gathered students. The first image showed a massive creature with gray fur and enormous teeth, running across a frozen landscape with terrifying speed. "This is called a wolf," Elena explained. "And they hunt in coordinated packs using sophisticated communication and group tactics that would rival any military unit in the galaxy." The students stared at the image with wide eyes. "Wolves will chase prey for hours without stopping," Elena continued, wearing down their targets through pure endurance until the victim collapses from exhaustion. She swiped to the next image, which showed a massive creature exploding from dark water with rows of triangular teeth. "This is a great white shark," she said, "a predator that has existed virtually unchanged for millions of years because evolution could not improve upon its design." Groth rumbled with unease, recognizing a fellow apex predator when he saw one. "It can sense a single drop of blood from kilometers away," Elena added, "and it attacks from below with such force that its prey is often dead before they even know they are being hunted." The next image made several students recoil in horror. It showed a massive reptile with armored skin and a mouth full of teeth, lurking just beneath the surface of murky water. "This is a saltwater crocodile," Elena explained, "a creature that has been killing efficiently since before the dinosaurs went extinct." She described how the crocodile would wait motionless for hours or even days, conserving energy until prey came close enough for a lightning-fast attack. "They kill through a method called the death roll," she said, spinning their bodies rapidly while gripping prey in their jaws to tear off chunks of flesh. The hologram demonstrated the technique, and more than one student looked away in distress. "But these are just the large predators," Elena said, swiping through more images. The students watched in growing horror as she showed them creature after creature, each more terrifying than the last. Their were bears that could run faster than ground vehicles and tear through metal with their claws. There were cats much larger than Mango, like lions and tigers that hunted prey many times their own size. There were venomous snakes that could kill with a single bite, and spiders that liquefied their victims from the inside. These are some of Earth's smaller predators, Elena said. And the students shuddered at the thought of what could possibly be considered small. She showed them the Komodo dragon, a giant lizard with bacteria in its saliva, so deadly that a single bite would cause infection and death within days. She showed them the box jellyfish, a creature so venomous that its sting could stop a human heart in minutes. She showed them parasitic wasps that laid eggs inside living hosts, with the larvae eating their way out from the inside. She showed them army ants that moved in swarms of millions, stripping entire ecosystems clean of any living thing too slow to escape. By the time she finished, the common room had grown so quiet that Elena could hear the soft sound of Mango's breathing. Earth, she said simply, is what Zane biologists would classify as a death world. Professor Vrexthel had entered the common room at some point during her presentation, and he stood at the edge of the crowd with his compound eyes fixed on her. A death world, he repeated, is a planet where the evolutionary pressure is so intense that every organism must become either predator or prey, with no middle ground. Elena nodded in confirmation. Everything on Earth evolved in an arms race against everything else, she explained. And the creatures that survived were the ones that found ways to kill more efficiently than their competitors. She looked down at Mango, who had woken up and was watching a distant student with the focused intensity of a hunter. My ancestors survived that world, Elena said quietly. And Mango's ancestors survived that world. And somehow, despite being surrounded by so much death, our two species found each other and decided to become friends. Malox pulsed with confusion, their bioluminescent communication struggling to convey the complexity of their emotions. You make it sound as though the partnership was equal, they said. But surely humans are the dominant species in the relationship. Elena smiled and shook her head. Cats domesticated themselves, she explained, by moving into human settlements and choosing to stay near us. She described how the ancient cats had likely been attracted by the rodents that lived near human food stores, and how humans had welcomed them because they kept the pest populations under control. But over time, Elena continued, the relationship became something more than just mutual benefit. She scratched behind Mango's ears, and he leaned into her hand with obvious pleasure. We started to care about each other, she said. And now cats live in millions of human homes across Earth. Not because they have to, but because they want to, and we want them there. Professor Vrexthel stepped forward, his mandibles clicking slowly. You are telling me, he said with careful precision, that your species formed an emotional bond with a creature that hunts for pleasure, that kills for entertainment, and that could theoretically turn on you at any moment? Elena met his compound eyes without flinching. Yes, she said simply. And we would not have it any other way. Mango chose that moment to stand up in her lap, stretch luxuriously, and begin kneading her legs with his claws, purring loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. The students stared at this display of apparent affection from a creature they now knew to be a ruthless killer. And many of them felt a new emotion stirring in their minds. It was something like fear, but not quite, because it was mixed with a strange and uncomfortable respect for the humans and their terrifying little companions. The academic cycle continued at the Galactic Academy, but something fundamental had changed in the way the other species viewed their single human classmate. Elena noticed it in the subtle ways they moved around her, giving her slightly more space in the corridors and speaking to her with a new tone of careful respect. She also noticed it in the way they looked at Mango, who had become something of a celebrity on the station. Students who had once laughed at the small orange creature now watched him with wary fascination. observing his every movement as though studying a dangerous phenomenon. Mango, for his part, seemed completely oblivious to his newfound fame and spent most of his time doing what cats had always done, sleeping in warm spots, demanding attention when he wanted it, and ignoring everyone when he did not. One evening, Elena received a message from Professor Vrexthil requesting a private meeting in his office, and she made her way through the academy's winding corridors with Mango trotting at her heels. The professor's office was a fascinating space, filled with specimens and artifacts from dozens of worlds, and Elena spent a moment looking at the preserved creatures floating in stasis containers along the walls. "Thank you for coming," Professor Vrexthil said, gesturing for her to take a seat in a chair that had been specially configured for human anatomy. Elena sat down, and Mango immediately jumped into her lap, circling twice before settling into a comfortable position. The professor watched this display with his compound eyes, his mandibles clicking softly. "I have been teaching xenobiology for 300 cycles," he began, "and in all that time, I have never encountered a species quite like yours." Elena waited quietly for him to continue. "At first," the professor admitted, "I dismissed your presentation as a misunderstanding. For how could such a small creature possibly compare to the apex predators of other worlds?" He gestured toward the containment unit where the shadow stalker was being kept for further study, its dark form pressing against the energy barrier. "But then I saw the demonstration," he continued, "and I began to understand that I had made a fundamental error in my assumptions." Elena nodded, scratching behind Mango's ears as he purred contentedly. "The error," Professor Vrexthil said, "was believing that the size of a predator determined its danger, when in fact, the truly remarkable thing about your species has nothing to do with size at all." He rose from his desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the stars. "Every species in this academy fears predators," he said, "and they have developed elaborate methods of containment and control to protect themselves from dangerous creatures." He turned back to face Elena, his compound eyes reflecting the starlight. "But your species does something unprecedented," he continued, "something that I still struggle to fully comprehend." Elena waited, already knowing what he was going to say. "You befriend them," the professor said, and there was something almost like wonder in his translated voice. He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily, his exoskeleton creaking with the movement. "You look at creatures that evolution designed to kill," he said, "and instead of running away or destroying them, you reach out and try to make them your companions." Mango stretched in Elena's lap and yawned, showing his sharp teeth before curling up again. "It is not just cats," Professor Vrexthil continued, "for I have been researching your species since the demonstration." He pulled up a holographic display showing various images from Earth's history. "You domesticated wolves and turned them into dogs that guard you children," he said, showing images of massive canines playing gently with human infants. "You tamed horses and rode them into battle," he continued, displaying images of cavalry charges throughout human history. "You trained falcons to hunt for you and return to your hands," he added, showing a hawk swooping down from the sky to land on a human's leather-clad arm. "You even keep venomous snakes as pets," he concluded with obvious disbelief, "bringing creatures into your homes that could kill you with a single bite." Elena smiled and nodded. "We do seem to have a habit of that," she admitted. Professor Vrexthil leaned forward, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "But why?" he asked, and the question seemed to come from somewhere deep within him. Why would any species deliberately seek out danger and try to form bonds with it? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. She thought about her grandmother's dog that had protected the family for 15 years, and her childhood cat that had slept at the foot of her bed every night. She thought about the horses she had ridden at summer camp and the parrot that lived in her neighbor's house and called out greetings whenever she walked past. "I think," she said slowly. It is because humans are lonely. The professor tilted his head in confusion. We evolved on a dangerous world. Elena continued, surrounded by creatures that wanted to eat us. And we survived not because we were the strongest or fastest, but because we learned to work together. She stroked Mango's fur as she spoke, and he purred louder in response. But working together was not enough to fill the emptiness, she said, because no matter how many humans surrounded us, there was always something missing. She looked up at the professor with a gentle smile. So we reached out to other species, she explained. Not to conquer them or control them, but to find connection with something different from ourselves. Professor Vrexthale was silent for a long moment. That is a remarkable way to approach the universe. He finally said. Elena laughed softly. I suppose it is, she agreed. But to us, it is just the way we have always been. She stood up, cradling Mango in her arms, and walked to the window to look out at the stars. Somewhere out there, she said quietly, are billions of species we have never met, and when we finally encounter them, our first instinct will not be to fear them or destroy them. She turned back to face the professor. Our first instinct will be to reach out our hands and say, hello, she said, and to ask if maybe, just maybe, they might want to be our friends. Professor Vrexthal rose from his desk and joined her at the window. Perhaps, he said thoughtfully, that is why your species will go far in this galaxy. He looked down at Mango, who had fallen asleep in Elena's arms, his small body rising and falling with each peaceful breath. You see aliens and think not of threat. The professor continued, but of potential friendship. And that is something truly rare in a universe that so often operates on fear. Elena smiled and shifted Mango to a more comfortable position. Wow, she said. It has worked out pretty well for us so far. She looked down at the sleeping cat. This small predator that had chosen to share its life with her species so many thousands of years ago. And I think it will keep working, she added, for as long as there are humans who are willing to reach out toward the unknown and ask if it would like to be friends. Professor Rex, though, clicked his mandibles in what Elena had learned was his species, equivalent of a smile. I believe you may be right, he said. And for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, Elena felt like she truly belonged among the stars.